welcome you to Black, White, and Blue, an open conversation about race in Michiana.
We can't breathe!
Throughout America and right here at home, we've seen thousands take part in protests.
George Floyd, say his name! George Floyd, say his name!
A rallying cry for justice.
We can't breathe!
Following the death of George Floyd. He was killed last month by a Minneapolis police officer.
Black Lives Matter!
We made a decision to air this special tonight on the eve of Juneteenth, a day celebrated by African Americans as our own Independence Day. Back in 1865, this day commemorated the end of slavery. It's 155 years later, and our nation still has a long way to go after sad reminders of how our nation must work together to ensure justice and equality. We welcome you to Black, White, and Blue, an open conversation about race in Michiana.
We can't breathe!
Throughout America and right here at home, we've seen thousands take part in protests.
George Floyd, say his name! George Floyd, say his name!
A rallying cry for justice.
We can't breathe!
Following the death of George Floyd. He was killed last month by a Minneapolis police officer.
Black Lives Matter!
We made a decision to air this special tonight on the eve of Juneteenth, a day celebrated by African Americans as our own Independence Day. Back in 1865, this day commemorated the end of slavery. It's 155 years later, and our nation still has a long way to go after sad reminders of how our nation must work together to ensure justice and equality for all. The point of this discussion is not to inflame, but to inform. It may feel uncomfortable, and at times you may or may not agree with what you hear, but we hope you listen.
From 16 News Now, this is a special report, Black, White, and Blue, an open conversation about race in Michiana.
And good evening to you. I'm Joshua Short, and we welcome you to the west side of South Bend. We are at the Salvation Army Kroc Center, where we have an esteemed number of members from our community, a part of a conversation that we hope you have in your own households, your own workplaces, and places of worship from here on out. This is just the start, the beginning of a conversation that we all need to hear. So we're glad you are here to listen. I want to start by introducing our panelists and the members of our Michiana community, starting on my left. We have Jordan Geiger, local activist and member of the Black Lives Matter movement. Next to him, we have Maya Perry, a local activist in the city of South Bend. Superintendent Todd Cummings, superintendent of South Bend Community School Corporation. We have Coach Muffet McGraw, former head coach of the Notre Dame women's basketball team. We appreciate you being here as well. We've got Rod Roberson, the mayor of Elkhart, Indiana, joining us as well. We appreciate that. Sharon McBride, Common Council member representing South Bend's 3rd District. She's also the director of St. Joseph County Community Corrections Dukem Center. We thank you for being here. Lieutenant Dwayne Robinson, he is the Public Information Officer for Michigan State Police's 5th District. We appreciate you joining us as well. We've got South Bend Police Chief Scott Ruszkowski joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. And we've got Tyree Bonds. He is the brother of Eric Logan, and that's where we start this discussion tonight. For those of you who don't know the backdrop of this, your brother was shot and killed this week, a year ago. We know the circumstances. For those of you who don't, there was a 9-month investigation that ruled that the shooting was justified, despite the fact that there was no body camera. According to police, your brother had a knife at the time of this incident. The officer involved, Ryan O'Neill, is no longer part of the department. He resigned immediately after the incident. My first question to you, what is justice?
To me, to be honest, I've been saying it ain't justice. It's justice is for, depends on who you is. You know, because justice, how justice is supposed to be, is supposed to be for all people and all colors and all races. But in our community, justice is not the same. It's a two-way street. And some people be put in places they want to do something different, but they can't, because the people hiring them is telling them what to do. That means, and then you get the people on the streets, where they struggling, and the young people struggling, they starving, and then they do the things they do. But we need, as a community, to really reach out to them and go out to them and talk to them, but we don't.
You are sitting right next to the chief of police of this city, your city. And I don't mind saying this because you've gone on record talking about it, Chief. You've known this family well before this incident. For you, how does it, describe the feeling of being an officer and representing your men and women who sacrifice their lives on a daily basis, but then also knowing that your friend and a friend's family is forever grieving because of what they feel is a lack of justice?
Yeah, anything that we're involved in as a police department, I unfortunately, because talking against it, people, I feel the same pain that everybody else does. Like it's one of my family members, no matter what the circumstances, whether it's a ticket or a life being taken. Yeah, it's no secret that we've known each other for over 30 years, the entire family, and extended family as well. So that hits a little more closer to home. And I do take every one of those personally, despite people telling me I shouldn't take these things personally, no matter what it is. I can't help that. That's what I've done for 32 years. That's what I've done my whole life. I was raised essentially the same way as Tree was and Tree's family was, with the morals and ethical values that they were established with, the same thing I was established with. So I could never comprehend, but I understand.
Yeah, and Tree was his nickname growing up. That's what you call him. That's
sorry.
what you call him. I mean,
Yes.
you know each other like that, right? Lieutenant Roberson can chime in here if you can. What is it that's changing about policing? What is it that is harder or easier as a result of what we're seeing now? Because around the world, we're seeing a movement. What is changing for policing? And is it something that you are welcoming? Is it something that you're hesitant about? What's changing right now in our lives?
Everything, from top to bottom and bottom to top.
Lieutenant, you talked about things changing in Southwest Michigan as well, right?
Yes, well, in the entire state of Michigan, there are reforms, proposals that are being made from the Attorney General, from the governor, and they're asking the state police as well as the local police departments to take up these proposals if and when they are passed, and to embrace them and to demand that those amongst their ranks buy into it, because the public has told us through the various protests and sometimes violence that they're tired of it. They're tired of feeling like they're under siege by the police versus being protected, or versus the police being the guardian of the public. So it's like, that's just the total opposite of what we're supposed to do and what we're supposed to be as law enforcement officers. So thank God for these young people that have stepped up in droves across the nation, that have really opened their mouths and their minds, and have essentially told us adults that we've gotten it wrong. And they don't want to go into a future seeing this same type of activity from the police for themselves and future generations. So I really applaud them. So that's what's changed, like Chief said. Things that are occurring, that have been occurring, they're now being filmed. Apple and Samsung put a camera and a video recording device in everyone's hands. And so it appears that it took what happened to Mr. Floyd in Minnesota to where there was no gray area as to what happened to him, for that to wake up a sleeping giant that's been just underneath the surface all these years and that people have been crying out for.
You mentioned the youth, and you just mentioned George Floyd. He was killed by Minneapolis officers who are now charged in that murder. I want to go to the youth, starting with you, Jordan. Member of Black Lives Matter here locally. Talk about this renewed sense of action from people your age, in their 20s and in their 30s, in a very diverse group too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly been a renewed enthusiasm around addressing police misconduct and brutality. But I think it's important to note that we've been in this building before. We were actually here 4 years ago, and I think it was September, October of 2016, when we had a bunch of us young folks created a campaign called Fire Nipper Campaign to raise awareness around the history of misconduct related to Aaron Nipper. And at that meeting, Chief, I mean, I saw you on the stage, and we came up to you and reached out to you and said, why don't we have a meeting over at LaSalle Library where we can talk about what we can do as a community to heal? And we were there at that meeting, and you never showed up. So for you to sit here and say, you know, this is the time to hear, and we've been trying to hear, I haven't seen it. I honestly haven't seen it. And I think that you should accept some responsibility for this situation, because it's my understanding that you put Sergeant O'Neill up for promotion. And
not true. Not true.
Okay, you didn't put him up for promotion.
No, I did not.
Okay.
And there's other facts that you're lacking there, Jordan.
Such as?
If you can
we'll
respond,
talk.
I'd love for you to respond to that as well, and talk about at least your willingness to be involved in your community, the city that you're from.
Look, Jordan and I go back a long way, no doubt about it. I give credit where it's due and discredit where it's due. There are other facts that Jordan's leaving out, and I'm not going to discuss them right now. He knows what they are. And for a fact, I did not promote Ryan O'Neill to sergeant, and that is a fact. And that's what I operate on. That's what I've been told, even conversations with Jordan and others way back when. Facts, evidence, and information and evidence to all come out to everybody so they can see and then make a determination. So
let me ask you this. Is there a percentage of people in your department, officers in your department, that you say, you know what, they may need to change themselves a little bit more so that they can be better police officers? Have you come to that reality?
That's been happening for 4.5 years that I've been chief. There's some that need reality check. I will tell you that over 70 officers have left the department before any of this, since I became chief. Not all of them left under unsavory circumstances, but some of them did. Some of them were due retirement, earned their retirement. I wish I had them back. There are other officers that I'm glad that they aren't here anymore.
But where we are right now as a nation, it is in a different place than where we used to be, and it's led by people who look like you. Describe what that means, but also how much of a toll does that take on people your age?
I think it takes a huge toll, but I mean, it's our responsibility to make sure that generations that come after us don't have the same lived experiences. And I think the reason why you're seeing this enthusiasm that you're talking about is because we've seen a string of officer-involved murders. And so as people saw what happened to George Floyd, it was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back. I think people are just tired and they want change now. And you know, since I've been here organizing, I've never seen this kind of enthusiasm around police reform and change among young people. So it's really inspiring to see, and it takes a huge toll on us, but we all understand that, you know, we have to make change or things will remain the same.
Black Lives Matter, you're a part of that group. There are these ambiguous terms and ambiguous words that when we say them, there's always an affront to it. When we say Black Lives Matter, there's a response of, well, all lives matter. And someone told me the example would be as if there's a burning house and you try to put that fire out, but the next door homeowner is jealous that you aren't putting water on his home, saying that my home matters too. Well, we know that, but it's the one that's in danger that needs to be approached right away. When you hear Black Lives Matter, what do you think about? How do you take that phrase and understand it's a movement, not an exclusion? Toughest question of the night. It's okay. Jordan, you're a member of the Black Lives Matter movement. When you hear people say all lives matter, what do you think?
I mean, I don't think about it. I don't pay any attention. I mean, because I'm focused on...
Why don't you pay it attention? What is it about people saying that don't they get?
I mean, I don't know what it is that they get. I think it's just anti-black racism. But I mean, my focus is on black people, you know, and I understand that black people, especially in the city of South Bend, we are the most marginalized. The data clearly shows that. There's no argument that we're all treated equally here that's founded at all. I mean, as we look at even the racial disparity reports that have come out over the years, which we push for, and that was a fight, it clearly shows that 40% of black households here have little to no liquid wealth, meaning that they have no cash in their hand. So when you have folks who are that desperately poor, what do you expect? You know, we need a movement that is about the upliftment and the affirmation of black life.
I hate when people say all lives matter, because if all lives mattered, we wouldn't need to say Black Lives Matter. Clearly, that is the big issue, and I think we need to. I hate to hear when people say that. I think it's just silly.
One of the things that rings true too, Coach, is when you hear people say, I don't see color. I have friends, you know, white friends I speak with, and they say, Josh, I don't see color. And sometimes I want them to. I think that people get, and at its core, rudimentarily speaking, we are the same, sure, but we are also uniquely different. That does not make me less than you. That just makes me different. And that's what I wish we heard more from at least people who don't look like me, is that I do see your color and I acknowledge that, because otherwise it seems like you're not facing your prejudices and potential biases. Would you all agree with that? I know you've been outspoken recently in your own city that's seen its strife and seen its protests as well. What do you think about that? And how do you, when you hear Black Lives Matter, what do you think?
You know, it's interesting. I appreciated Coach saying that how she felt about Black Lives Matter. But I think that unless we can contextualize systematic racism, it becomes difficult to understand the true meaning of why we're focused on this particular issue right now. And I've had a lot of conversations, and even for some of our kids that are a little bit younger, come through a couple of generations, if you can't understand how race has played a role in our existence as African Americans everywhere, and I mean everywhere, you don't have an understanding of truly the systematic nature of it. I was drawn to a story about Miriam Mitchum, who is a young lady from Drake University, and she's from Ferguson. Actually, she graduated this year from Drake, and she was trying to explain to her friends how she felt about race, and asked them to go to Webster's to look up the term. And Webster's term starts with a belief. And she contacted Webster's and said, that's not my experiential feel with respect to race. It's not my experience with race. They're changing the definition. And it was interesting because they said, we're changing it because of Miriam. Now, here we are in 2020, and the definition of race is changing with the context of everything that we're talking about. And if you can't experience it, which I experienced it before I was born, my life was shaped by race. And as we moved to Elkhart, my life was shaped by race. The schools that I attended was shaped by race. And until I left and went to Northwestern University, and only after that was created, I created some options for myself, it still was shaped by race. And I think what Miriam was suggesting is that we live within a racial prism, which is why Black Lives Matter. I think that it's important for us to be able to contextualize what systemic means. And I think that would be a better conversation for the viewers, so that they could better understand whether or not, you know, do they, have they seen, because for someone to tell me I don't see color, are you colorblind? Yeah. I see that that's light on the walls and brown on the bottom. I see that Muppet has on a blue top, and I love leopard print, by the way. but I see that. So how can I not see color? And I know it. I know that you speak about it in that way. But if you don't see color, then you don't see me.
And that's truly powerful, Mayor. And you mentioned systemic racism. Someone told me, my barber, I was sitting in his chair and we're talking about this stuff. And he says, trying to remove racism out of America is trying to get flour out of a baked cake. It's just not possible. It's intertwined in what we are and who we are. Sharon, I want to bring you in this part of the conversation because you work with both sides. You work with your community. You're from South Bend. You also work closely with law enforcement as well. How is racism being interpreted by others who don't look like me and you? And how do you start those conversations? It's not an easy conversation to have, really.
Well, actually, it is like me being caught in the middle, and meaning that being in law enforcement, born and raised in South Bend, on the lake, west side of town, was bused to LaSalle, living in the Washington district. So went to integrated schools, but came back to the hood, if you will. Lived in the projects, and went to school, did everything. My mom was a single parent of 6, had nothing, on welfare, living in the projects, but did what she asked us to do. Go to school, work hard. So I made a choice of coming back home. Came back home, worked my way up, thank God, into the ranks. And so the disconnect with where I am with a lot of the community and some people is people think that I am privileged as a black person, so I'm disconnected from the black community. And I'm just as black as I was when I was born, and also experience some of the same things. Where the disconnect is a lot of times as a community, when blacks talk about the disparities, which we have many of them, and we need reform, we need all of these things. But personally for me, you would think that a person of color would be welcomed in community corrections. I'm not the police, but I happen to have a job that holds people accountable who are sentenced to community corrections. So they look at me as locking, how do you lock our black people up? But coming on a opposite side, I wanted to run for council to serve the community, to help bridge the gap between the black community and police. My daughter is by a police officer. So I have a lot of history touching corrections and also coming from the streets. Just 6 months ago, I got pulled over with my mom in the car coming from a funeral, and it wasn't a local South Bend PD or county, but I got pulled over with guns drawn. And I'm in the car nervous and couldn't find my own registration.
Let me stop you there. Your mother, how did she, your mom's here, when she raised you, what were those discussions like? When you get pulled over, what do you do?
Well, the discussions were, and actually it's still even now on my way here, coming from Dukem Center to here, a police officer pulled behind me, and I immediately got panicked and heightened, and I immediately hurried and got over in the right lane. Don't have a ticket, I'm on the council, I'm in community corrections, but growing up, I still have that heightened anxiety because that's what we're taught. When you see a police officer, you better be doing the speed limit, 10 and 2, and so I have that anxiety. When I did get pulled over, I'm a licensed gun carrier as well. And I'm going in my mind back and forth saying, do I tell the police that I have a gun, or do I not say nothing because he didn't ask, or do I wait to see if he tell me to get out the car? And so you still have all of these anxieties, and this was just in December. And even going forward, when I played basketball at Lake Michigan College and on to Grand Valley, my mom, my brothers, my family drove up through Stevensville, Berrien Springs, Saugatuck. We got pulled over every time after a basketball game until they recognized who I was and I had on my basketball jacket. And then it got to, oh, good game tonight, you guys can go on. So I was raised with the fear, and the reason, and I did not tell that officer 6 months ago I had my gun, he didn't ask, because you hear the stories that now it could go a whole nother way. That if I tell him, is he now gonna be afraid So it's a very difficult discussion, even for me, so let alone regular people in our community.
And really quickly, I've had conversations with people who are white, and they say, well, everybody clenches up when police are trailing them. But the difference is you're clenching up for different reasons. You could lose your life if you're a person of color, and that's been proven. And so there is a difference there that I wanted to make note of. Maya, I want to bring you in the conversation here because she mentioned daughter. As a daughter of parents, right, of someone, you have to learn how to grow up and come face to face with the reality of your blackness. How was it growing up and now being a member of South Bend? How do you use what you learned growing up to bring some word of wisdom to the young people that you see in these protests and these marches?
Getting connected. Something that has really been important for me the last year or so is becoming connected to local community organizations, getting around like-minded people who want to advocate for change, not only advocate for change, but to fight for policy changes that will improve the lives of Black people in South Bend. Race is something that has been ever present. As a Black woman, it's not something that I had to learn about. It's something that's thrust upon you as a child, from the way that people interact with you. I moved to South Bend around 2000, when I was very young. And I remember even then, there was a girl on my street. I lived over on the north side, who told me I couldn't play with her because I was Black. But my sisters could play with her because they were lighter skin. And so I think that's something that a lot of people forget, is that children are learning about race from the time that they are interacting. And we really need to do some things to shift the conversation.
Can I add on to what she said? Because just being at a number of protests that aren't even held by Black Lives Matter, I've had conversations with kids as young as 12 years old, young Black boys who were saying, I'm afraid that I'm gonna get killed by a police officer, and how do we change this? And one thing that I remind young people is that the way that we begin to change these things is by getting organized. The problem with South Bend is that our community, we lack that sense of togetherness, and it's understandable given our socioeconomic situation, but we can change these issues by organizing ourselves, doing proper planning, strategizing, and developing an agenda that really works to address the issues that are mostly impacting us.
I have something to say, and on all matters, this whole conversation. I'm a project of the streets, and I mean, really, I started when I was 8 years old, getting locked up. Juvenile centers, foster homes. And I still live with this every single day. And I'm 53 now. A lot of people don't know different things. I think sometimes you gotta put stuff out to make a change somewhere, and my pastor always helps me with this. And I used to be real edgy by saying that I can't read or spell a lick at all. But as you listen to me talk, you will never know that. I played basketball, all in trophy cases, but couldn't read. They didn't do nothing but pass me on to school. I dropped out, I just started gangbanging, selling in the streets. But out of all that stuff I was going through, I still have respect. That's where this come in at. I done what I done, but he was the officer. I still respected him as the officer, whatever I was doing. When we seen them coming, we still moved back. It's a lot of times things happen, it didn't turn out the way stuff turning out now. The generation was growing up, they're getting taught to do certain things, and the reaction from certain people on the police force, that's the reaction they're getting from the people in the streets. They know if they don't react, it's gonna happen to them anyway. I talk to them so much, that's why when I talk to him and talk to a lot of other officers I know, we have to make this change. And we have to do it because who we is, who we are. They say, oh, you got a record. You can't go talk to people where she work at. Why shouldn't I? I came from that part. I'm different now. I can help out a young man. You can't go into school and talk to young people because what you done, these are the people you need to make a change in our community. Because we will go to the streets, but you won't let them people in. You won't open the door for them people to give them people help. Them kids out there need help. Excuse my French, certain people in this room is not going to that street corner late at night and talking to them people because of what they see. I would go, Jordan would go, some other people go, she would go. We need, my pastor would go. Them the people we need to change this in the community because we know it ain't gonna happen up here. Everybody knows what goes on upstairs. They tell him what to do. They tell other people what to do, and they do got to do it, or they're gonna lose their job. They can't say it, but it's just the truth. But right now, look around here now. You have everybody different, young, old, whatever. We can make a difference, but we got to do it together.
He mentioned school. That's a perfect transition, Superintendent Cummings. I want to ask you a couple questions, but starting here. This weekend is Father's Day. This weekend is the first day of summer. This weekend is also Juneteenth. Several viewers watching right now may not know what that is. I didn't learn that in school. I didn't learn about Tulsa, Oklahoma and Black Wall Street in school. What does that say about our education system? We know that people learn about slavery, Sojourner Truth, they learn about Langston Hughes, but we don't learn the things that really shaped where we are and why we are. As an educator, do you think that needs to change? Do you think that people need to look back and see exactly what our kids are learning and maybe, just maybe, change it up a bit?
Great question, Josh. And I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say we have to do better. And I do want to say that I was really proud of my board on Monday night who passed the first ever Juneteenth proclamation, recognizing Juneteenth. 2 weeks ago, they passed the second, they had done it the last year, was the second ever Pride proclamation. So we want to make sure that our students know their history, but most importantly, that they feel honored, that they feel like they have a place. But we do have to look at our curriculum. We do have to make sure that our students are learning their history, that all of our students are learning about important Black lives and that Black Lives Matter, and to understand the history of America and to understand the history of Juneteenth and Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Massacre. And so my board has been committed to doing that and looking at our curriculum, and I've been very pleased to help lead that.
Speaking of the board meeting, you actually presented a plan, and it has to do with the discipline and code of conduct, which I don't think people realize. There is some racial discrimination in that too in our school systems, and how people are, I guess, the consequences that some of our students face if they do something as opposed to another student. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course, and Councilwoman McBride talked about it earlier when she talked about being bused from Washington to LaSalle. And so in the early 1980s, the district was under what was called a consent decree. And from that, you ended up with Plan Z and magnet schools. And then in Focus 2018, we right-sized the district and closed some schools. And the Department of Justice placed us under some stipulations. Well, we didn't honor those stipulations and we let the timeline lapse. And so as superintendent, I said, we have to get these back on track because we see escalated disproportionality. We see African-American men, girls, and special education students who are disproportionately expelled, suspended, and asked to leave class. So we have to address that. But we needed to make sure that we got the consent decree back on track. And so my team and the board approved on Monday a master compliance plan, which will update the code of conduct, will ensure equitable training for our principals and our teachers, will ensure that we are getting stakeholder input on what the code of conduct will look like, ensure that we are updating and upgrading our data systems. Most importantly, it's going to create a feedback loop from the board to the superintendent to classrooms. I'm proud that this is going back to federal court. I'm thrilled that we've gotten to the place where the consent decree is back on track because we have to do better. Our African American boys and girls are suspended and expelled at greater numbers. And I'm thrilled that on Monday night, the board approved it and it's going back to federal court. And I would say that's one of the highlights of my year as superintendent, that we got that back on track. and it's the right thing to do for students.
People notice, and this didn't get unnoticed by me, this reporter who was at the first protest following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. You were at the city's first protest. Why?
Oh, good question. Well, I was outraged, number one. Number two, I realized that George Floyd could have been one of my students. I knew that my students, even in my first year superintendent, my African American students are at an astronomical risk of dying by gun violence. And frankly, it was the least I could do. It was the least I could do because I knew my students, and I call them babies. I know I get asked not to do that, but they're the students that I have, and they're the best that their mothers and grandmothers have. And I knew that my students would be there, and I needed to be there with them. That was why.
We go from schools to colleges. Coach, you were not a teacher, but some would argue that you taught so many of the players that you coached, both on the court and off. 38 seasons in all, 33 at the University of Notre Dame. What are some of the lessons you learned from your athletes, specifically women of color? And how do you use what you've learned as a platform to maybe start conversations with your friends who may not get it, trying to convince the unconvinced?
Well, I think the most important thing that I can do for them is to help them find their voice. And I think it's so important that they use their voice. And I've been so proud in the last week of seeing Breonna Turner on SportsCenter talking about race, and Arike Ogunbowale's tweeting things, and Skylar Diggins is tweeting things. And they're standing up for what they believe in. Skylar has joined LeBron in what he's doing to get the vote out, and she's going to be part of his team. So I'm just thrilled that I can see these women who have come into Notre Dame in a very white environment, and they're thriving, and they're doing great things as they leave, and they represent us so well.
You got so many people who look at athletes and they look up to these athletes. I spoke with Brianna about a week ago as well, and she talked about how you were influential in her speaking out. She says that you were more than a coach. She even said that you made sure everybody was registered to vote, which I thought was great. I thought that was fantastic. But that's your role too, as a former coach. That was your role too. It was more than just coaching for you.
Well, I think I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, and I look at those roles and take them very seriously. What happens off the court is so much more important than what happens on the court. The life lessons that you learn from sports, there's so many great things, but especially for women, it's so important that they can stand up and understand that people are looking up to them, that they do have a platform, and that it's important for them to use it.
Let's go to some more of those ambiguous and polarizing terms. Defunding police is a topic that has come up so often in the last 2 weeks on the heels of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Anybody who wants to take the floor, what does defunding police mean? Should we take it at face value by the words themselves, or is it a deeper meaning to defunding police? Whoever wants to start that conversation.
I will. I mean, the movement for Black Lives has rolled out this campaign around defunding the police. And I think you should take it on face value, because it means exactly that. It means that we want to move resources from the police department and from the police budget to the community. It's a divest, invest model. So I'll give you a practical example here in South Bend, and you can correct me if I have the facts wrong if you like. But in the city of South Bend in 2020, they have budgeted for 240 officers to be on the force. Presently, there's about 223, and I know there's been some recent recruits. So what we're saying is, and this was actually brought up during your budget hearing last year, is that I think Councilwoman Regina Williams-Preston brought this point up. Instead of paying for more officers, why don't we hire people like Tree, people who are from the community, to serve as violence interventionists who can go into the community and de-escalate these situations so that police intervention is not needed. And I think that's an important model that we should look to, because as we can see around the country, more policing has not worked. I mean, we've known that since the 90s, that by increasing the number of police on the streets, that does not lead one-to-one to a reduction in crime. And so those are some of the things that we mean when we talk about defunding the police, which is moving resources. I'm an educator in the South Bend Public Schools. I taught at Jackson Middle School. I know that our SROs, and I would like for you to speak to this, that they do not engage in or complete their 40 hours of training, sensitivity training, that they should have. They are not trained in the code of conduct. We don't need more officers, most of whom are not even from this community, to be on our streets engaging with people who they don't even understand. They don't understand how these communities work. We need more people who are rooted here, who care about black people in these communities, who can go out and de-escalate situations without there being police intervention.
Is it that easy? I want to bring you in, Councilwoman, because I know you have a huge role in making some of these laws that we have to abide by in our county and in our city. Is it as easy as saying defund police and funding other programs? Is it harder? Is there a challenge to this?
There's absolutely a challenge. What police reform comes in various ways. And one of the things that we talk about already through the police department, and actually Chief could support or correct as well, from my understanding from years, the police department has not been at its full capacity due to officers retiring on and off all the time. So there is a surplus, if you will, in the 2020 budget. That's where they asked for raises to come in and different things of that nature that we did not pass. One of the things that we talk about is expanding programs. The council intentionally increased the PAL program, the Police Athletic League. Actually, it was under my referral because I box with the police and have been over 9 years or so.
I won't mess with you, I promise. All right.
But when you're talking about it, it is absolutely reallocating resources. But it's not as easy because we still need police officers. Someone breaking my house, if I don't get them, I hope the police will be there in short order. So we still need law and order on the streets. We still have the conversation. I respect and love the mission of Black Lives Matter. I'm in support of it, was at all the rallies and will be behind them. But at the same time, on the flip side of community corrections, we have another conversation that I would like to talk about. We have black on black crime that people are not talking about. And I am concerned and was out on the streets the last couple of nights with that as well. And it is true that people need resources, they need activities, we need housing, but I cannot condone taking another human life because of a beef that you have. So we do have to find resources and find for people to do and mentors, but there's a bigger problem than just police brutality. That's a huge problem, and we're gonna be part of the solution of reform, but we also have another aspect of blacks killing blacks as well.
I wanna mention something here because that is profound, and you are right now probably having a lot of people clapping. You probably have people frowning too, because that is a controversial statement for good reason, because you don't hear white on white crime and you don't hear Asian on Asian crime. You don't hear that as much as you do black on black crime. And some people who argue that position would say intraracial violence exists everywhere, and that it is not just a black thing. And I want to bring you into this because I've heard you at these protests, Maya, talk about this being an issue too, that it's black on black crime. Black on black crime is an issue, and it is something that should not go by the wayside. Is black on black violence a made up idea from people who are from the outside looking in, who, yes, they understand that what's happening in the southeast side of South Bend is a problem, but they have no clue what they're going through? Absolutely. I think that the term black on black crime it's been weaponized against black people that are speaking out against issues of police brutality and other kinds of violence that has been put upon us by the state. I really think that, as you were saying, intra-community violence, intra-racial violence is more prevalent than cross-racial violence. And so by zeroing in on only the crimes that black people commit against other black people, I think that that is a way to silence people, to say, well, you shouldn't speak up about police brutality because black people kill black people all the time, as though it's okay for the police to continue to brutalize us and kill us because there are interpersonal conflicts and intra-community conflicts. I think that we need to tackle those issues as well. But the root of intra-community violence is a lack of resources. It is a lack of jobs. It is prolonged unemployment in areas that are not being invested in by the city. It is a lack of educational opportunity. It is a lack of community connection.
And investing in our communities is something that is going to help to remedy that. This is not an overnight solution. This is going to take a long time. It's going to take generations of all of us working together to rebuild our communities, to establish those strong connections with people so that they no longer feel the need to lash out at each other in violence. But I think that using the term black on black crime really it's a distraction from the truth.
But when you have 70% of the people who are admitted and sentenced to Dukem Center who are black, and 60% of those are gun charges, we have a problem. So it's not taking away the voice. And I have an internal GED instructor. I have internal certified mental health specialists, internal substance abuse counselors. And we also have a reentry team that have job placement. We have employment all over Elkhart, Thor, Qualitor, Elkhart Plastics. We are working in Dukem. So that's a small piece with Dukem as part of the whole community. But it is still a problem of black on black crime.
So you heard me in the beginning. I give credit where it's due and discredit. Jordan is spot on when it comes to when we talked about original defund the police. I can tell you he knows that we've had these conversations. Matter of fact, Jordan is the only one who stepped up that made, quite frankly, any sense when it came to discipline matrix and things of that nature. He didn't sign his name to it, but I know who wrote it. With that being said, we are responding to at least 30 to 35% now from my last numbers of quality of life issues, barking dog complaints, property line disputes. My kid refuses to listen to me. My kid took off from school. Police go find them. Things like that, dude, should not involve the police. So when it comes to defunding, going back to what Jordan originally said, absolutely right. If we can alleviate 35, 40% of those calls, we wouldn't need the amount of officers that we have. Spot on, absolutely. And notably, we as police can help. What would you do? I know a lot of people think this is not true. I have a lieutenant sitting right next to me. Who do you think invented de-escalation? The police did. We invented that. It doesn't look like it, obviously. And is it being applied correctly? Obviously not. But we invented it, and I will tell you, I'm not talking about South Bend, I'm talking about in general in policing. Good cops doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons invented it. Somebody else coined that term of de-escalation. That's what you do out of 100,000 calls a year in South Bend to not have issues with those calls. And are they always right? No, but most of the time they are, and that's what that involves. Going back to the original, credit is due, he's spot on, and I'm glad you clarified that because a lot of people, including officers, are still confused by that. Take their money, they don't deserve raises, they don't deserve any of that kind of stuff, and it is all inclusive, and it makes perfect sense, exactly what Jordan and others have said.
Quickly, Maya, I want you to comment. You wanted to say something, I heard you. Did I hear you over here?
It was just in response to police being the architects of de-escalation. And I feel that if, in my mind, the de-escalation that I'm thinking of cannot be accomplished by someone in a position of coercive authority that is armed. I don't think that bringing armed individuals into conflicts where we're supposed to be de-escalating is really effective.
Where do we start? What's the solution, Tyree?
Well, like you said, this is going to go on because we're going to have to keep on doing it. But everybody in this room needs to understand it's more to this conversation than everybody out here putting out. You know what I'm saying? Because when you go to the south side, east side, west side, whatever, lake, it's got things going on crazy. Yeah, I mean, for real, it's really crazy out there. And if you don't have an opportunity to go to the east side and see the young people doing the things they're doing, or go to the lake and see what they're doing, you know, on this side see what they're doing, the southeast side see what they're doing, y'all would not be able to understand what's going on. To them, they don't have nothing and no way out. The only way out they know of is to hustle. And as you walk on the streets, People on the streets got more guns than the police got. And they ride around with them on their hips. 18-year-olds can carry guns. They need to change that law. You shouldn't be able to get a license to carry a gun at 18 years old. They out there with AKs and everything in our streets. That's the reason a lot of stuff goes on, because they is real crazy out there right now. And the people, like she say, me, Jordan, you, I can talk to them. You know what I'm saying? What part they won't listen to him at. He can't walk out there and talk to them. But we need people in the community to step up. That's where we're really gonna make a change and a difference now.
Anyone else? Solutions. The start of solutions. I know you mentioned, Coach, talking and having the discussions. And in fact, I wanna actually say this. Obviously, you and I are different, right? We embrace that though. We are different. We have a uniqueness. How do you tell those? How do you have that conversation? Do you start that conversation? Do you tell folks who look like you, say, hey, there's some things we need to talk about? How do you do that? How do you get rid of the awkwardness of it and the uncomfortability of it?
Well, I think that's so important. I don't think it's really uncomfortable. I think it's something we need to talk about. I think it's easy to look across the country and see injustice. It's easy to look across and see hate. And just because we haven't experienced it personally doesn't mean it can't make us angry. And I think, especially as a person of white privilege, we have to be the ones that step up to be, you have to be anti-racist. As someone said, you can't just say, oh, that's not good, I don't condone it. You actually have to fight to make it better. And I think that we need to do so much more. We need to have these conversations, and we need to step up in the communities and everywhere that we can and speak up. You're seeing all these athletes speaking up now, but it's mostly the black athletes. We need everyone to speak up about this because it's wrong.
Because I feel like what I'm saying about accountability kind of goes along with what she's saying. I mean, for white people, they need to hold themselves accountable, to unlearn racism and learn how to be anti-racist, to be accomplices in this fight. In addition to that, police officers, they have to be able to hold each other accountable. Again, we always talk about the bad apples and how there's only a few of them. But again, as a young person said, if you have 5 officers who are bad and 400 good officers, right? You have 405 officers who are bad, because the others are allowing for this to happen and they aren't saying anything, be it for whatever reason. Also, even within our own communities, as a leader, as a young leader, I hold myself accountable in terms of talking to young black men. She mentioned the Southeast side and the violence that was going on there just the other night. We took some of those same kids who were present in that situation and we took them down to Indianapolis just yesterday and spent 8 hours with them, and we talked about accountability. Yes, we can talk about the police violence and the racism that happens in our community, but we also have to take a role in making sure that we are not killing each other, because at the end of the day, we need all of each other to overturn this oppression.
I think that kids talk about keeping it 100, keeping it real, keeping it staying. But the thought is really making sure that you have authentic relationships. That's why I said connecting. And what he was talking about, being on the street and hustling, and if you can't talk to them, you can't connect with them, they won't listen. And you got to find some creditable messengers to be able to make those connections. And so it's not just the kids that are hustling on the street, but it's also those that may not be aware of what's going on in the street. And we got to bring people to a place where we have a commonality. And there are many people right now that are really trying. I mean, I was talking to the president of Thor the other day. He's trying to create some way in which they can see and feel this moment that we're going through right now. So that's why I keep saying that this is a seminal moment. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to create some authenticity in our relationships so that we're not just talking to each other or just listening. I love to just listening. I have to connect to be able to figure out that way in which this goes beyond these doors. And that's why I said connecting.
I think in the same vein of authenticity and what you said about listening, I wholeheartedly agree. I also feel that it is way past the time to simply listen. We need, as I said, anti-racist policy change. We need people to be advocating for policy change that is anti-racist and instituting those policies within whichever organization that they work in, with whatever structure that they are a part of. We are all capable of being change agents. And so I think we are well past the time of people just listening. We have known what the problems are for far too long, for generations. For over 100 years, people have been talking in scholarship, people have been writing, thinking about these issues and the way to solve it. But the only way to solve it is through anti-racist policy change.
A word I heard both of you all say multiple times is anti-racist, and I want to make sure our viewers understand that it's one thing to be not a racist, but to be against racism.
To be actively fighting it.
To be actively fighting it, well said, because otherwise it would be viewed as an empty platitude.
But both you have to actively fight that both internally within yourself and also externally within your community and your surroundings.
What are y'all, 70? What is this? That was well said. I mean, it's wisdom with our youth, and you guys are leading this new movement, and it says a lot, and it proves just why we're in good hands. I want to end with you from a law enforcement standpoint, police standpoint. What's a solution?
Well, let me just first say that I don't want us to leave here with the idea that we came to demonize law enforcement or the police. This profession is a very noble profession done properly. And we know that there are some bad actors within this profession that are not doing this job what they swore to do when they came into the fold. So let me just clear that. I've worked this job for 22 years. I've worked with some outstanding and dynamic officers. I've worked within the community, the business, faith community, all over, and I've seen officers doing outstanding things for their communities each and every day. And unfortunately, we have these incidents around our country that puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth for law enforcement. Going forward, I think that our young people, as I said earlier, but also just stakeholders in the communities, need to be at the table when the new policies and procedures and reforms go forward, so that the voices of the ordinary citizens can voice their concerns, and we write those concerns right into the new reforms. Okay, and then we hold the bearers of those policies and procedures, the officers, we hold them accountable 100% of the time across the board. And then we also ensure and make sure that our prosecutors, that they are fair with their charges for not only citizens who break the law, for officers who break the law as well. So that is a fairness, an air of fairness that goes across this nation where everyone can feel like they're inclusive and that everybody is getting the same equal justice, just as our Constitution says that we're supposed to get.
Despite our differences, despite I may not agree with everything, but we all are working towards the same goal. And we need to be able to work together collectively to fix it. And last part of that is we want also to encourage Black and brown people to become police officers. So how do you encourage that and have those uncomfortable conversations? Because right now, in light of what is happening, no one will want to be a police officer. But how do we build and get diversity if we can't get them to trust them? So that's one of the, where you got to get the balance, because you have to mentor them and take them out and talk to them and be honest and truthful. But you also have to let them know that not all of them are bad, because it's a great profession.
You guys are doing a big service for taking part in this. It's not an easy conversation to have, and we only had an hour. We could have gone for another hour, right? I mean, it's good, and I love what you said. You were here to listen, and listening does a lot, and we hope that's what each and every one of you did watching tonight. This is a conversation that we hope continues in your home, and as we said at the top of this broadcast, continues in your workplace and your place of worship as well, because it's desperately needed now more than ever. We appreciate you watching this special report here on Channel 16. We say goodnight from South Bend, and thank you for listening.